It was an ordinary Friday in early October when Sloane Ashcroft left the Ashcroft Holdings Tower in Lower Manhattan and drove north into Vermont. The sky was clear. The road was dry. She was thinking about Monday's board meeting when the wheel jerked hard right with no warning, and the brake pedals sank to the floor. The Range Rover slid out of its lane and slammed into an old moss-green Ford on the shoulder. She stepped out and ordered the man to move it. Eamon Whitlock did not. In his hand was a cream envelope with her father's name on it. Sloane offered him a roadside settlement before the dust had settled. She pulled a checkbook from her bag, asked for a number, and prepared to write whatever it took to make the morning disappear. The man in the flannel jacket folded his arms and shook his head. "I'd prefer this goes through proper channels, ma'am," he said. "Bumper replacement on a 1994 F-150, depending on the sheet metal, runs $800 to $1,200. Repaint with a color match on a vehicle this age is another $7 to $9. If the impact jarred the transmission casing, we're looking at $3,200 for an overhaul. I'd rather a shop tell me what's actually wrong before either of us puts a number on paper." Sloane paused. She had bought and sold companies whose accounts payable were larger than the state budget of Vermont. She had not, in 12 years of doing it, met a man on a roadside who priced bodywork the way a senior partner priced an indemnity clause. She put the checkbook back in her bag and studied him a second longer. The local cruiser arrived 20 minutes later. Lights off. No urgency. The officer was a man in his early 50s with a salt and pepper mustache. He nodded at Sloane, then turned to the man in the flannel jacket and said, "Eamon, you all right?" by way of greeting. And the man answered, "I'm fine, Hal." Long morning for the lady, though, and the easy familiarity of that exchange landed in Sloane's chest before the suspicion did. The tow truck would be at least an hour out. Eamon suggested she wait inside the Copper Kettle, the small coffee house just up the road, where the cell signal was thinner than the coffee but the heat worked. She agreed without warmth. The woman behind the counter was somewhere past 60, silver hair pulled into a low knot, an apron the color of old paper. She poured Eamon a mug of coffee without being asked, and slid it across the counter the way people slide things to family. Then she lifted her eyes to Sloane, and she did not pour Sloane anything, and she did not look away. The look was not hostile. It was studying. It was the look of a woman who had seen exactly this scene before, in exactly this order. The well-dressed white woman from somewhere south of here, the dent in a local black man's truck, the checkbook produced too fast. Sloane, who had spent her adult life being deferred to in rooms with marble floors, felt her face warm. She ordered a coffee. The woman poured it. Neither of them spoke. Through the front window, Sloane watched the officer shake Eamon's hand on the way back to the cruiser. Two men who had lived inside the same 5 miles of road for 20 years, who knew the shape of each other's bad weeks without having to ask. Sloane understood, with the small, cold clarity she usually reserved for hostile takeovers, that she was the outsider in this room. Not him. Her. The bell above the door rang at 20 minutes past the hour, and a small girl in a denim jacket pushed her way inside, with both arms wrapped around a folder of pressed maple leaves. She was perhaps 7 years old, with brown skin a shade darker than her father's, 2 careful braids tied with red ribbon, and the watchful eyes of a child who had learned early that strangers required studying before they required smiles. She saw the woman at her father's table. She slowed. She walked the last 6 feet at half speed, and when she reached him, she tucked herself behind his leg without a word. Eamon's hand settled on her shoulder, protective, unhurried, in a gesture so practiced it could only have come from years of doing it. "This is my daughter," he said. He did not give the name. The child kept her eyes on Sloane from behind his elbow, the way she had been taught to watch strangers who looked at her father wrong. Sloane, who had not spent more than 4 consecutive minutes alone with a child since her own childhood, gave a small, stiff nod and looked away. Her eyes landed on the chair beside Eamon, where his coat was folded over the back, and where, peeking out from the inner pocket of that coat, was a corner of cream-colored stationery she had already seen once that morning. 4 words she could read upside down through 50 feet of glass. For Sloane, when ready. Her father's hand. The cold started at her wrists. It climbed her forearms before it reached anywhere her conscious mind could name it. The crash had not been random. She had known it from the moment the wheel jerked. The envelope was not random either, and this man, with his careful daughter, and his careful answers, and his hand resting protective on a small shoulder, knew exactly who she was. Had known it from the second she stepped out of her ruined car. Before she could speak, Eamon reached across, slid the envelope deeper into the pocket of the coat, and folded the coat over his arm. The gesture was unhurried. It was the gesture of a man who had decided long before this morning what he would and would not give away. Sloane reached into her bag and set a black business card on the table between them. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. The kind of card that opened doors in cities where neither of them lived. "When you're ready to talk about that envelope," she said, "call me." Eamon looked at the card without picking it up. His daughter peered around his elbow at it with the same expression. "I won't call," he said. "But if you come back, I'll be here." The tow truck pulled up outside. Sloane stood on her way out. She glanced once at the child, who was still watching her, and she had this strange, disorienting sense, walking past the counter where the silver-haired woman was still studying her, that she had just been weighed by two people in a town and had not been told the result. In the back of the rental cab on the way to Burlington, she dialed her private counsel in New York and asked them to send an independent inspector to the Range Rover, not the dealership, not anyone the company had ever used. She drove back the next morning under a thin gray sky in a rental sedan from the Burlington airport, telling herself the reason was the car. The real reason was him. Linden Hollow in daylight was a town of perhaps 420 people. A diner, a hardware store, a feed shop, a single traffic light that blinked yellow in all four directions, and a bend in the road that led to a long gravel driveway. At the end of that driveway stood a converted barn with a low cedar roof and a single sliding door painted the color of slate. A black mailbox at the end of the drive bore no name, only a hand-cut number in iron. Inside, the air was warm from a wood stove in the corner. The smell was walnut oil and beeswax, and the clean, astringent bite of fresh sawdust. And the pieces on the floor were not country carpentry. A custom conference table in white oak, 12 feet long, edges still being sanded by hand. A pair of Senate chamber-style chairs, the joinery so tight it looked carved from a single piece of wood. A panel of marine decking laid out for a yacht refit. A clipboard hung by the door listed clients in pencil. A senator she had seen at a Boston charity gala the previous spring. Two old Brahmin family names that had been in shipping since before the Civil War. A collector in Tokyo. A federal judge whose name had been in the papers that week. Sloane stopped where she stood. This was not a man hiding from money. This was a man who had chosen not to be paid in it, and the choice, she understood now, had to have been made by someone who had once been paid a great deal of it, in a city that had never quite stopped reminding him he was a guest in his own career. She pulled out her phone. She searched his name. The first result was a Boston Globe profile from 2015. Eamon Whitlock, J.D. Harvard, 2007. Made partner at Harrow, and Whitlock at the age of 31. The youngest black partner in the firm's 140-year history. Departed in 2017 for personal reasons. The article had been written by a reporter who had known him from law school and had not pulled her punches about what the firm's culture had cost him to make partner there. The photograph in the article showed him in a dark suit, leaner, younger, the eyes the same. Beneath the photograph, the caption named the 3 deals he had closed in his last year at the firm. One of them was a merger that had been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that summer. Sloane remembered the deal. She had not remembered the name of the counsel. He set down his chisel. He wiped his hands on a square of cloth. He took his time. He always took his time. It was the patience of a man who had spent 15 years in rooms where speaking too quickly had cost other black men their jobs. "I was the man your father called. The night of March 14th, 2017, he said, the night before he died." Sloane sat down on the white oak chair he had finished that morning, because her legs had decided for her. He had been Howard Ashcroft's personal counsel for 12 years. He had walked away 9 years ago, after his wife died. He laid the envelope on the workbench between them. He did not push it forward. "You're not ready," he said. "You still walked in here thinking, I want money." She drove back to the inn shaken in a way she did not have a category for. Halfway down the gravel road, she pulled the rental sedan onto the shoulder and sat with both hands on the wheel and made herself say the thing out loud that she had not yet said. Twice now since meeting him, she had caught herself studying his hands, his clothes, the age of his truck, looking for evidence that he was what she had first assumed he was. A tradesman with a chip on his shoulder, a man with a small claim he had inflated into a large one. She had done this with him before she had done it with anyone else in her life. She had done it the second she stepped out of the Range Rover and seen his face. The shame of having done that sat in her chest like a swallowed coin. She called Brennan Holcroft from the rocking chair in her room at the inn. Brennan had been her father's chief lieutenant for 19 years and was now, in everything but title, the man who actually ran Ashcroft Holdings while she sat in the chairman's seat and learned the company her father had left her. She told him she had met Whitlock. She did not mention the inspection. She did not mention the envelope. Brennan answered, the way he always answered when something had unsettled him, too smoothly. Whitlock had been her father's counsel. He might be angling for a settlement. He would send a legal team up the next morning to handle it. He warned her, in the same even voice, not to underestimate the man. Whitlock had been a difficult presence at the firm. Brilliant, aggressive, the kind of lawyer who held grudges, in Brennan's careful word choice, longer than was professional. Sloane registered the word professional, and the way Brennan had stretched a small extra beat around it. She did not respond. Then, almost as an afterthought, almost casually, Brennan said, "And the car? Anything back from the inspection?" Sloane held the phone away from her ear for half a second. She had told no one outside her private counsel in New York about the inspection. She had not called Brennan from the cab to Burlington. She had not emailed him from the airport. "Still waiting," she said. She ended the call. She sat with the dark screen in her hand for a long time. That night, she opened the old photo library on her father's iPad, which she had inherited along with everything else and had not scrolled through. She found a picture dated June of 2016. Her father in a hard hat, smiling. Eamon Whitlock beside him in shirt sleeves, leaner, no gray yet at his temples, and between them, a slim black woman in a charcoal blazer, smiling at someone off-frame. Behind them, a half-poured concrete foundation, and a banner that read Ashcroft Valeris Project. Sloane did not remember the project. She called her assistant in New York and asked for the file. The reply came back 20 minutes later. No record in the active archive. Her assistant called again at midnight to say the files appeared to have been purged from the server in late 2017 on a Friday afternoon by an internal user whose credentials had since been deactivated. In the morning, she walked to the copper kettle. Marjorie, the silver-haired woman, the name was painted on a small wooden sign by the register, poured her a cup of mint tea instead of coffee. "You didn't sleep last night," Marjorie said. Sloane, caught off guard by the bluntness, took the tea without answering. Marjorie leaned on the counter and wiped her hands on the apron. She studied the heiress the way she had studied her the first morning. Only the studying had softened into something more like deciding. "Cora Whitlock was a friend of mine," Marjorie said. "Emin's wife. She was an architect. A good one. Better than the firm she worked for ever paid her like. She died 9 years ago in a scaffolding collapse on a job site outside Springfield, Massachusetts. Eamon brought Nora here a few months after the funeral. He hadn't built a piece of furniture in his life before that. He learned everything he knows in this town from a man named Cyrus Bell who passed 2 winters back." Sloane's hands cooled around the mug. "You should know something else," Marjorie said. "Quieter now. When Eamon worked at that firm in Bostwitze, half the partners didn't think he belonged in the room, made it their business to remind him too, in the small ways men like that do. Coffee orders, assistant work, being asked the 3rd time he came in whether he was a courier, being introduced at client dinners as the firm's diversity hire, like that was the title on his business card. He outworked every one of them. Your father was the only one who ever sat him at the head of the table, without making him earn the seat twice." Marjorie poured more tea into the mug without being asked. I'm telling you that, so you understand what kind of patience you're dealing with. He didn't wait 9 years for an envelope because he was angry. He waited because Howard asked him to. There's a difference, and it matters. And the woman who died on that scaffolding wasn't a stranger to your last name either. Cora liked your father, she told me once. He was the only man at that firm who ever asked about her work before he asked who her husband was. Sloane walked to the workshop with both hands in her coat pockets and the wind cutting through the seams. Nora sat cross-legged in the wood shavings drawing a fox in pencil. Eamon was fitting the door to a bookcase. Sloane lowered her voice so the child would not hear. Your wife died on my father's project, didn't she? Eamon set the screwdriver down on the bench. He took his time. He always took his time. That's part of what's in the envelope, he said. But it's not the most important part. She did not understand what he meant. Nora padded over then, fox drawing in hand, the pencil still tucked behind her ear. She held it out to Sloane with both hands, the way a small child offers something she has decided is important. You can have it, she said. It looks a little like you. Around the eyes. She said it the way children say things, without flattery. As a fact she had decided was true. Sloane took the paper between her fingertips. The fox had a sharp jaw and 2 careful eyes, and was looking sideways out of the page at something only it could see. It had been a very long time since anyone had given Sloane Ashcroft anything for free. By that afternoon, her independent inspector had filed the preliminary report on the Range Rover. She read it in the rocking chair at the inn. She read it twice. She drove back to the workshop with the printed pages folded in her coat pocket. The findings were short. The power steering fluid reservoir had been drained through the return line. The brake line on the right front had been loosened by hand at the union. Both alterations had been made deliberately. Both required familiarity with the specific model. Someone had wanted her steering and her brakes to fail at roughly the same time. Eamon read it without expression. His hand closed around the page hard enough to crease it down the middle. You're not safe at the inn, he said. Tonight, you stay here, upstairs, the room next to Nora's. The locks are old, but they're mine. And so is the road in. She began to refuse. She looked out the window. The light was already failing in the trees. She nodded. That evening, Nora insisted on showing her the room herself, taking Sloane by the hand and walking her upstairs with the seriousness of a small docent presenting an exhibit. The room had a single bed, a quilt in faded blues, and a window that looked into the maples. Nora pointed out the nightlight in the hallway and the squeak in the 3rd floorboard from the door so Sloane would know to step around it if she needed to come out at night. Then she went back to her own room and left the door cracked, the way she did when she trusted someone enough to sleep in the same house. Brennan Holcroft arrived in Linden Hollow the next morning, without warning. He drove himself in a black Audi sedan with Massachusetts plates and parked it at the curb in front of the inn as if he expected the building to greet him. He had not called ahead. He went straight to the inn and was told the woman in room 2 had checked out before dawn. The clerk, a teenage boy with bad acne and an honest face, did not know where she had gone. Brennan tipped him $40 to remember if she came back. The boy pocketed the bill and did not intend to remember anything. Marjorie spotted the black Audi from the front window of the copper kettle as it drove past, and she picked up the phone and called Eamon at the workshop before the car had reached the end of the block. Eamon's face changed when he heard her voice. He hung up. He walked across the workshop, took his daughter's small hands in his, and crouched until his eyes were level with hers. Sweetheart, he said, I'm going to walk you over to Miss Iris for a couple of hours. Her kettle's on. She has the new puzzle she promised you. Nora studied him the way she studied strangers. Then she nodded. She trusted his face more than she trusted most things in the world. He walked her next door, to a cottage where Iris kept houseplants in every window and a kettle always warm, and he handed Nora over with a kiss on the top of her braids and a nod to Iris that said everything Iris needed to know. On the walk back, Nora's small voice from the doorway behind him said, Is she coming back? The Ashcroft lady? He turned. He looked at his daughter, who had asked the question in the same even tone she used to ask whether the maple leaves had turned yet. I think so, he said. She nodded, satisfied with that, and went inside. The meeting at the Copper Kettle began at 8 that night. Marjorie locked the front door, She turned the sign in the window to closed. She stayed behind the counter polishing glasses she had already polished, because she was not the kind of woman who left a friend to sit at a table alone with a man like Brennan Holcroft. The lamp above the corner booth made everything in the room look older than it was. Brennan did not bother with small talk. He set his briefcase on the booth seat. He did not sit. He looked at Eamon the way he had looked at him for 15 years across boardroom tables. The same small downward angle of the jaw. The same studied indifference that had passed for civility at Harrow and Whitlock. "Whitlock," he said, "whatever documents you're holding for Howard Ashcroft, you turn them over to his daughter tonight. Confidentiality terminates at the client's death. You know that," Eamon answered without raising his voice. He did not stand. "You know that's not correct," he said. "Fiduciary duty extends to the testator's stated intent. And you know exactly why Howard didn't leave these documents with you." Sloane turned in her seat toward Brennan. She kept her voice flat. "Brennan, yesterday on the phone, you asked me about the results of the car inspection. I don't remember telling you there was an inspection. How did you know there was one?" 2 seconds of silence. Long ones. Then Brennan smiled. Just at the corners of his mouth. "You mentioned it earlier in the call. You don't remember. You've been under a lot of stress." She did not smile back. Brennan buttoned his coat with the slow precision of a man who was used to being looked at while he did it. He looked at Eamon across the table. His voice dropped half a register. "Whitlock, you've been out of the law 9 years. You've been hiding up here building rocking chairs and playing folk hero. Don't assume there's still anyone left in Boston to protect you. The bar is a small world. People remember what they choose to remember about a man like you, and what they remember can be edited." The sentence carried a weight neither of them needed to translate, and Marjorie, behind the counter, stopped polishing the glass in her hand and set it down without finishing. For the first time since Sloane had met him, something genuinely cold moved behind Eamon's eyes. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He looked at Brennan the way a man looks at something he has waited a long time to look at again. "I don't need protection," he said. "I need you to know I still remember everything. Every memo, every signature, every name you put on a settlement check the families never read." Brennan walked out into the dark. The bell above the door rang once behind him. Marjorie did not move from behind the counter for a long minute. When she did, it was only to lock the door behind him a second time, slowly, with the deadbolt this time. Sloane sat with her hands flat on the table. She asked the only question that mattered. "What is he afraid of?" Eamon did not take his eyes off the door. "He's afraid of what your father was going to say to you," he said. "Before he had a heart attack 2 weeks too soon. The week after he wrote that letter." The cold spread outward slowly. It reached every part of her at once. The car had not been an accident. And if the car had not been, then her father might not have been either. She asked him, in the morning, to take her to the place where his wife had died. He did not want to. He did it anyway. They drove 2 hours west in the moss green Ford. The radio did not work, and he did not fix the silence, and neither did she. The road climbed out of the Vermont hills and dropped down through farm country, and then through the long industrial corridor along the Connecticut River, before it turned off onto a county road that had not been resurfaced in a decade. The site was an empty lot now, fenced off with chain link that had begun to lean. The grass grew up to her knees. The foundations of 3 buildings stood unfinished. Gray concrete, weathered almost black, threaded with old rebar gone to rust. Yellow safety tape, faded almost white by sun, still hung in shreds from one corner of the chain link. A red-winged blackbird sat on a fence post and watched them. Eamon stopped near the gate and did not get out for a long moment. When he did, he walked to a spot near the middle of the property and stood there without speaking. Sloane followed at a distance. She understood, without being told, that this place was a grave for him in every way that mattered. The Ashcroft-Villaris project was meant to be a geothermal energy complex, Eamon said. His voice was even. Howard's personal interest. He believed in it. He believed the state would back it within 5 years if we got the pilot built on time. 3 months into construction, an internal report was filed flagging structural defects in the scaffolding system. The report named the supplier, the load tolerances that had been ignored, and the engineers who had refused to sign off. The report was suppressed by Brennan Holcroft because acknowledging it would have delayed the project 6 months and dropped Ashcroft Holdings stock by an estimated 18.25%. The company could not afford to lose. 2 weeks after the suppression, the scaffolding gave way. Cora was the architect of record, Eamon said. She was on site that morning for a structural review. She was killed where she stood. 2 laborers were injured. One of them never walked again. He was 26 years old. Sloan stood very still. Your father didn't know Cora was my wife, Eamon said. I never mentioned her at work. By the time I made partner, I'd learned it was easier if the firm met my resume before they met my face. I kept her separate from all of it. I thought I was protecting her. From the small comments, from the assumptions, from the way certain partners would look at her at the holiday party and then look at me. He let that sit for a moment. He did not look at Sloan. When Howard found out who she was, he broke. He never recovered. He told her the rest plainly. Howard had wanted to come forward publicly. Brennan had persuaded him to settle quietly instead. 7-figure payments to the families. No press. A list of names the heiress had never been told existed. Eamon, as Howard's personal counsel, had handled the negotiations on Howard's behalf. He had not known until the end of that week that one of the names on the settlement list was his wife. Sloan sank down into the long grass. She put her hands over her face. My father paid for your wife's death. Your father didn't know who he was paying for, Eamon said. When he learned, he tried to tell me himself. He couldn't get the words out. That was the night of March 14th. He called me at 11 in the evening. He apologized for an hour. He said he would resign by the end of the week. For the first time in many years, Sloan cried. Not because she was ashamed of crying anymore, because she had finally understood what her father had been carrying when he died. Eamon sat down on the ground beside her in the long grass. He did not touch her. On the drive back, the sun went down behind the green mountains, and neither of them spoke. She rested her hand against the doorframe of the truck. His hand on the gear shift was 3 inches away. Neither moved. Neither needed to. When they reached Linden Hollow, Marjorie had a pot of black tea waiting on the kitchen table, and the lamp lit in the kitchen. Nora was already asleep upstairs. Sloan sat down. Eamon sat across from her. She picked up the envelope. She broke the seal. Inside were 2 things. A handwritten letter, 4 pages on cream stationery in her father's hand, and a typed list of 11 names. She read the letter first. Howard apologized to his daughter for choosing silence when he should have spoken. He described in plain language what Brennan had done and why he had agreed to stay quiet, to protect the company, and to protect her from a scandal that would have followed her name for the rest of her life. He wrote, near the end of the 3rd page, I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I believe you will do what I was not brave enough to do. The final paragraph. If one day you are reading these lines and I am no longer here, remember that I had decided to come forward the Monday after I wrote this letter. I told Brennan I no longer trusted him. Sloan laid the pages flat on the table. The list was alphabetical. 3 engineers, 2 site supervisors, 4 mid-level managers at Ashcroft Holdings, 2 officers from Valeris Construction. Brennan's name was 6th. She looked across the table at Eamon. Why didn't you publish it in 9 years? Because Howard asked me to wait for you. The back door of the kitchen opened without a knock. Marjorie stepped in carrying a small wooden box the size of a paperback book. The lid worn smooth from years of being handled. She set it down on the table between them. Cora gave me this a week before she died, Marjorie said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. She told me, if anything happened to her, I was to keep it, and I was to hand it over only when Howard Ashcroft's daughter was standing in this kitchen. Both Eamon and Sloan went very still. Inside the box were 2 items. A small black USB drive, the kind no one sold anymore, and a folded note in handwriting Eamon had not seen in 9 years. Original structural report. I made a copy before submission. Eamon did not move for a long time. He had not known. He had not known she had backed it up. Marjorie's eyes were wet. I promised her, Eamon. I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry. He looked at her. Then he nodded once. Not absolution. just understanding. He had known Cora well enough to know exactly why she had done it. Sloane plugged the drive into her laptop. The file opened on the first try. The full structural report, original metadata, intact, signed by Cora Whitlock as architect of record, 2 engineer signatures appended in the rejection field, and attached to the document, an internal email thread between Brennan Holcroft and the project director, with a single sentence in Brennan's reply: "Remove this report from the system by close of business." It was hard evidence. There was no version of the story it did not break. Sloane closed the laptop and looked across at the man who had waited 9 years to hand it to her. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the letter. For the 9 years." She flew back to New York the next morning. She handed her independent counsel the technical report from the Range Rover inspection and asked them to deliver it directly to the FBI field office in Manhattan, with a request to open a parallel investigation. She called an emergency meeting of the Ashcroft Holdings Board for the following Thursday. 48 hours notice, the minimum permitted under the bylaws. She did not retain Brennan's recommended attorneys. She brought in independent counsel from Chicago. When the directors filed into the boardroom on the 38th floor, Brennan was already seated at the head of the table opposite her. Eamon sat in the observer chairs against the back wall, in a dark suit, credentialed as outside legal counsel under her formal authorization. He said nothing. She opened with the quarterly financials. Clean, routine. Brennan visibly relaxed. He believed this was an ordinary meeting. Then she turned the screen. Her father's letter, scanned, projected page by page. The list of 11 names. The original structural report from the USB drive. The internal email thread. The room went silent in a way that had weight to it. 2 of the directors, named 6 and 9 on the list, rose halfway out of their chairs to object. "Sit down," she said. "I have not opened the floor." One of them, the older of the 2, turned in his chair and looked toward the back of the room where Eamon sat. "And what is he doing in this room?" he snapped. The contempt was not subtle. It was in the pitch of his voice. It was in the word he had used for he. It was in the way his eyes had gone to the suit before they had gone to the face. Sloane's voice did not rise. "Mr. Whitlock is here at my request," she said, in his capacity as a member of the Massachusetts bar with more years of corporate experience than anyone seated at this table. "Sit down." The director sat down. She made 3 motions. First, the immediate resignation of Brennan Holcroft and the 2 directors named in the suppression. Second, voluntary disclosure of the original incident to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Third, the establishment of a new restitution fund, transparent, publicly audited, for the families of the injured and the dead. Then she advanced the slide one more time. The technical report from the inspection of her Range Rover. Steering and brake systems manually compromised. Not a fault, an act. 4 days ago, she said, someone tried to kill me. The FBI is investigating. I am not accusing anyone in this room. I am informing you. Brennan stood. His face had gone the color of plain paper. "You are destroying your father's legacy," he said. She did not raise her voice. "I am finishing what my father had decided to do before he died. You know that better than anyone." He turned to the back of the room. "Is this your doing, Whitlock? After 9 years?" Eamon did not answer. He only looked at him. The look was enough. The vote came in. 7 in favor. 2 opposed. The 2 opposed were the names on the list. Brennan walked out of the boardroom. In the elevator lobby on the 38th floor, 2 agents from the Manhattan field office of the FBI were waiting for him with a warrant. The charge sheet referenced the Cora Whitlock fatality in 2017, the death of Howard Ashcroft in 2025, and the tampering of a vehicle belonging to Sloane Ashcroft 4 days before. In the hallway by the floor-to-ceiling windows afterward, the city spread out below them in late afternoon light. Sloane and Eamon stood without speaking for a long moment. "Thank you for being there," she said. "You didn't need me there," he answered. "I just wanted you to know you weren't alone." She looked at him. Not at outside counsel, not at the man with the envelope. At him. 3 weeks passed. The story moved through the Wall Street Journal, then Bloomberg, Then the national wires, Brennan Holcroft was indicted federally on charges of obstruction of justice, document fraud, and attempted murder. 2 of the directors lost their licenses. The investigation into Howard Ashcroft's death was formally reopened. Sloan worked 17-hour days. She met personally with all 9 of the families on the original settlement list, traveled to 4 states in 3 weeks, apologized to each, in her own name and in her father's. She declined every interview and gave one written statement, 12 sentences long, signed in her own hand. Eamon went back to the workshop. He finished a walnut rocking chair no one had commissioned. Nora asked every morning when the Ashcroft lady was coming. He told her, when she's done with her work. The child accepted this, but she set a new drawing on the kitchen table. The moss green Ford this time, so it would be there when Sloan came back. The 4th weekend, Sloan drove up in a gray Subaru she had rented in Burlington. She told Marjorie shortly, "I don't want to drive the one someone adjusted the brakes on." She came to the workshop on a Saturday morning. He was rubbing oil into the rocking chair. He looked up when she came in, but he did not look surprised. "I don't know why I came back," she said. "Maybe because you don't need a reason anymore." She set the fox drawing on the workbench, in a small black frame. Then Nora came in, saw her, froze, and ran across the wood shavings to throw her arms around Sloane's legs. As if she had been waiting only for permission, Sloan rested her hand on top of the small braids. The gesture was clumsy. It was real. 6 months later, late spring, Vermont came back green. The new workshop was framed up. Brennan Holcroft had been sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. The investigation into Howard's death had concluded with a finding of slow poisoning by elevated nitroglycerin doses, substituted into his prescription bottle. Sloan had moved to Linden Hollow 3 months ago. She ran the Cora Whitlock Foundation from a small office above the copper kettle. Nora had stopped calling her the Ashcroft lady. She had decided on her own to call her Sloan, and Sloan had not corrected her. On a Saturday afternoon in May, the 3 of them painted the new workshop door together. Eamon stood on a ladder. Nora crouched at the bottom with a small brush, tongue caught between her teeth. Sloan, in jeans and one of Eamon's flannel shirts that did not quite fit, worked the middle. Nora looked up at her. "Sloan, are you going to stay forever?" Sloan glanced at the ladder. Eamon was looking down at her. She turned back to Nora. "I'm thinking about it." Eamon came down the ladder slowly. "Sweetheart, go find Marjorie for a minute." She said she had cookies. Nora ran across the yard. Eamon turned to Sloan. "You don't have to promise a child something you haven't promised yourself," he said. "I'm promising both of them," she said. At the same time, he looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised his hand and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the back of his knuckle. It was the first time he had touched her in almost a year. She did not pull back. He did not move closer. A moment. No more. Long enough for both of them to know it had finally arrived. Nora came back across the yard with a cookie in each hand and ran straight to her father and to Sloan and threw an arm around each of them. In the last light of the afternoon, they sat together on the porch. The moss-green Ford was parked under the maple tree. Marjorie stood in the doorway, drying her hands on her apron. Neither of them had been looking. He had been keeping a promise. She had been carrying a name, and somewhere between a sabotaged steering wheel and an unopened envelope, 2 people who had stopped expecting anything from the world found they had been waiting for each other all along.